Altering the course of human events takes a grand idea and careful execution, most of the time. But at these fateful points, plans went out the window. Percy Spencer was so fascinated by the sinking of the Titanic that he became a scientist. He joined the Navy, trained as a radio electrician, and ultimately became a civilian expert on radar during World War II, earning the Distinguished Public Service Award for his work. And he did it all without ever having graduated from high school. After the war, Spencer worked for Raytheon Manufacturing, a defense contractor. As he was walking near the radar equipment one day, he absent-mindedly stuck his hand in his shirt pocket and found a gooey mess. Spencer often carried a Mr. Peanut candy bar to feed the squirrels at lunch. He knew enough about radar to suspect that its heat-producing magnetron waves could be the culprit, but he wasn't sure. So he placed a bag of popcorn kernels in front of the machine, and they popped. Then came a raw egg, which dutifully exploded all over a skeptical colleague's face. Spencer fine-tuned his discovery with Raytheon and marketed it to airlines, railways, restaurants, and cruise liners as the radarange, or, as it's known now, the microwave oven. Fortunately, microwaves have come a long way since 1947, when they stood nearly 6 feet tall, weighed 750 pounds, and cost $3,000. That's roughly $35,000 today. These split-second decisions also changed history. August 2, 1943, began as a cloudy, moonless night in the South Pacific for 26-year-old Navy Lieutenant John F. Kennedy. As Kennedy and his crew patrolled the Solomon Islands from their boat, PT-109, a Japanese destroyer pierced through the fog and sliced the smaller ship in half. An enormous fireball filled the sky, and 2 men aboard PT-109 were killed. As Kennedy and 10 other survivors huddled around the wreck, they realized they had no choice but to swim to a nearby island. Kennedy, a former member of the Harvard swim team, personally towed one of his wounded comrades with his teeth for 5 hours through shark and crocodile-infested waters to Plum Pudding Island, where they ate coconuts to survive. After several days, the men flagged down 2 Solomon Islands natives, passing in a canoe, who agreed to take a message to the Allied forces. The dispatch was carved into a coconut shell, Naro ISL. Commander. Native knows POSIT. He can pilot. 11 alive. Need small boat. Kennedy. The islanders delivered the coconut, and the men were soon rescued. Years later, Judge Ernest W. Gibson Jr., a colonel in the South Pacific during the war, surprised the newly elected President Kennedy with a gift. It was the coconut he had carved his message into. Kennedy had it encased in plastic and used it as a paperweight throughout his presidency. Today, it is on permanent display at the John F. Kennedy Library in Boston. Different though they may be, Stephen King and Dr. Seuss have 2 things in common. They are both among the most successful authors in American history, and they both narrowly escaped a life of obscurity. Theodore Geisel, the good doctor's given name, wrote his first children's book, A Story No One Can Beat, in the mid-1930s. Working as an advertising illustrator at the time, Geisel sent his whimsical manuscript to 27 publishers. They all rejected it. After the last cold shoulder, Geisel stomped down New York City's Madison Avenue, determined to burn the manuscript and, perhaps, his writing career. While he was out cooling off, he bumped into his old college roommate, Mike McClintock, who happened to edit children's books at Vanguard Press. Geisel shared his woes with McClintock, who asked to see the story. McClintock suggested a few changes, and Vanguard published the book in 1937 with a new title, And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. According to Geisel, if I had been walking down the other side of Madison Avenue, I'd be in the dry cleaning business today. Stephen King's first published book was about a bullied teenage girl who discovers that she has fantastic mental powers, which she uses to get revenge on her tormentors. King's worst critic wasn't the publishers, it was himself. He disliked his story so much that he threw it away after writing only 3 pages, according to his memoir on writing. A few hours later, his wife found the pages crumpled and covered with cigarette ash in the waste paper basket. She took them out and started reading, and she was hooked. She wanted me to go on, King later wrote. She wanted to know the rest of the story. And so he went on. Carrie sold over 1 million paperback copies in its first year. Some things are not happy accidents. These petty conflicts changed history. It was bound to be a case for the ages even before the suspect parked his white Ford Bronco on that hot Los Angeles night in 1994. O.J. Simpson, football legend, rental car spokesperson, Naked Gun co-star, was accused of killing his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and a local waiter, Ron Goldman, on the steps of Nicole's posh home in Brentwood, California. The evidence against O.J. would appear to be damning, including blood in the Bronco and on a glove that matched one found near Goldman's body. DNA evidence became a household term with the O.J. Simpson trial, and it was not his friend. Neither was a man named Cato Kalin, who was living in O.J.'s guest house and testified that he could not account for O.J.'s whereabouts at the time of the murders. O.J. Simpson's team had plenty of its own angles to work. The trial unfolded just a few years after the Los Angeles riots, and the racial polarization of the city was palpable. In fact, the defense team took pains to label one of the LAPD officers investigating the case, Mark Furman, as having a history of making racial statements. Still, many observers believed O.J. would be convicted. And then the prosecutor asked him to try on the bloody glove found at the crime scene. The image of O.J. Simpson attempting to squeeze his meaty hand into the snug leather fingers became a defining moment in the trial, as did the way defense attorney Johnny Cochran described it in his now historic closing statement: "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." And the jury did. These inventions have changed the world in the last decade. In the summer of 1928, Scottish physician Alexander Fleming was in such a rush to go on vacation that he accidentally left a stack of dirty petri dishes in his laboratory sink. As if this weren't already gross, the dishes were smeared with Staphylococcus, a bacterium that causes boils, sore throats, and food poisoning. Let's hope the doctor at least washed his hands before he left. When Dr. Fleming returned weeks later, he found something interesting in the mess in his sink. One of the petri dishes was dotted with bacteria everywhere except for where some mold was growing. The area around it was clear, as if protected by an unseen barrier. Upon closer inspection, Dr. Fleming realized that the mold, a rare form of Penicillium notatum, had secreted a mold juice that killed several strands of deadly bacteria. Dr. Fleming published his remarkable discovery, and almost no one noticed. In fact, years later, Howard Walter Florey, an Australian pathologist, found Fleming's paper by accident while leafing through old medical journals. Along with biochemist Ernst Boris Chain, Dr. Florey began to explore the therapeutic effects of the mold juice, and by 1941 they had collected enough penicillin to use on the first human subject, a 43-year-old police officer suffering from a terminal bacterial infection he'd contracted after scratching himself on rosebushes in his garden. The results were astounding. The patient's fever dropped and his appetite returned, and the penicillin used to treat him was hailed as a wonder drug. Unfortunately, when supplies ran out, the officer's infection returned and he died. Still, Dr. Fleming shared the Nobel Prize with Dr. Florey and Chain for their work on the magic med. "I certainly didn't plan to revolutionize all medicine by discovering the world's first antibiotic," he remarked, "but I suppose that was exactly what I did." Check out the moments that changed women's history forever.